all you amazing, beautiful souls. I am so glad you are here today. My name is Lacey Bean, and today is episode 1 of Church Crime Time Tuesdays. If you've been following me on any kind of social media platform for the last year and a half, you know that I have been deconstructing my faith. During that process, I have been unlearning a lot of misogyny and racism and patriarchy, and one of the big things that I have learned in this process is just how much crime happens within Christianity across the board. And I'm talking back in the Ancient of Days, even to now modern times. The problem that I have found is that Christians in general, and especially church, and I'm talking the big C, church, has a big problem with accountability. Many times when a crime happens, they either sweep it under the rug or it is ignored altogether. That has developed a huge problem within Christianity today. So I am here to tell those stories. We are going to be covering a multitude of topics, all the way from cults to small claims of embezzlement, but we're going to be covering very hard topics of abuse and murder and so much more. When I decided to do this series, within 10 minutes I came up with a list of 20 cases that I wanted to cover on this channel. The fact that it only took me about 10 minutes to come up with 20 stories screams that we have a problem. Now, I'm going to be focusing mostly on the white evangelical branch of Christianity. As time goes on, maybe I will branch out into different religions. As of now, that is where my experience comes from, and that is what I'm going to be focusing on. Now, I will be giving trigger warnings at the beginning of each episode because some of these cases do cover very triggering topics. I want to tell these stories so that the victims get a voice and are finally heard. If you find this kind of content interesting, you're going to want to make sure that you hit that subscribe button and also ring the bell. That way you do not miss any uploads. So the idea of Church Crime Time Tuesdays came to me because I am a huge fan of true crime. I mean, the amount of true crimers that I follow here on YouTube is slightly embarrassing. I mean, it's insane. My husband thinks I'm crazy, and that's okay. I just embrace it and we're going with it, okay? So because of my love for true crime and my deconstruction journey, I decided to combine the two, and Church Crime Time Tuesdays was born. So today we're going to jump into episode 1, and you better buckle up because, man, oh Lord, it's a doozy. So I'm going to start off with a trigger warning. This case is going to cover things like eating disorders, child abuse, murder, and cults. So if this is something that you're uncomfortable with, please feel free to skip this episode and check back with us next week. So today we're going to be talking about Gwen Shamblin. Some of you may know who she is. Some of you may not. If you don't know who she is, I'm going to show you a picture of her. Yes, that is her hair. I am of the opinion that she either believes that the higher the hair, the closer to Jesus, or that is where she's hiding all of her secrets. Actually, it's probably both with Gwen. So Gwen grew up as a Christian, but she was specifically a member of the Church of Christ. Now, the Church of Christ proclaims to be a non-denominational church, but they definitely have very more conservative views. Women are not allowed to be in any position of leadership. They can serve within the church. That's usually childcare or youth ministry or something along those lines, but no, they cannot be an actual pastor, deacon, or elder within the church. That is always only the men's job. Also, the Church of Christ believes that worship should be done without instruments because they adhere strictly to the Bible, and instruments were not something that was used back in the Bible days. So they have worship that is a cappella, meaning there are no instruments. They also adhere to the Bible. They believe that the Bible is inerrant, meaning it is without flaw. It is the inspired word of God, 100% true, that God spoke to man and man wrote the Bible, but it is straight from God. Now, I will say this was a belief that I used to hold on to. Thankfully, that is not a belief I have anymore. No shade to people who do believe this, but I think that we miss a lot of the beauty within the Bible when we read it as a literal text. Instead of seeing the beauty and the complexity within the book and the stories and the depths of the parables and things like that, we miss that when we read the Bible in a literal way. Anyways, moving on, that is just my own opinion. So Gwen is very famous for creating the Christian diet book called The Way Down Workshop. She created this diet book in 1986, and it became very famous very fast. So the way that this diet plan works is it's very similar to what you would call intuitive eating. So basically, you are not allowed to eat until your body physically grumbles, and if you get hungry prior to that point, you are supposed to take it to Jesus and pray and just wait until you need to eat. When you do eat, you are only supposed to eat until you are satisfied, and not eat to where you're actually stuffed. There are many problems with this diet, and we're going to get into a lot of them, but just in the beginning, this diet does not promote any kind of exercise, and they also promote that you should be eating your favorite foods first, so that when you do get to that satisfied point, that you're not tempted to continue eating because you didn't get to your favorite foods. They've been criticized for this from the get-go because most people's favorite foods are not actually full of the best kind of nutrition for you. So they've been criticized for that point as well. So this started really booming in the 90s. Gwen became very famous for it. She was interviewed by talk shows. She was interviewed by multiple TV stations. She went on tour. Multiple churches across America would implement these workshops for their members because it was not only a diet, but it was Christian based, and so it became a huge thing. If you did not grow up in the 90s, then you probably don't know that in the 90s, diet culture was huge. Everyone was talking about being thin and what kind of diet they were going on. The whole fat-free and low-fat thing was just exploding. So naturally, tying this to religion was just a moneymaker. It exploded. Gwen became famous. It's not hard for somebody like Gwen to become famous for things like this because she's super charismatic, she's bubbly, she's fun, and she just draws people in. So naturally, she created a very big following. Now, the Way Down Workshop was a 12-week course, and there are many people who said during this time that it was one of the happiest times of their life. They felt great, they had a lot of freedom, they were getting skinnier, and they just felt amazing about themselves. Unfortunately, that didn't last. So in 1999, Gwen decided that she was going to start her own church, and she named it the Remnant Fellowship. Now, this is where things start to take a turn. So as she started this church, naturally she was able to get a lot of members because she had already created a huge following for herself. People were moving from out of state to move to Brentwood, Tennessee to just be a part of Remnant Fellowship. I think a huge reason that a lot of people were so attracted to this church was because of Gwen, because she did have a huge level of popularity. She was very famous, and so people believed that by coming and being a part of this church that they could just be that much closer to Gwen and that much closer to stardom, if that makes sense. So as Gwen started gaining members and building this church, people were still using the Way Down Workshop. It was still exploding. At the time, they were two separate entities. You had the Remnant Fellowship Church, and then you also had the Way Down Workshop. Now, Gwen in the Remnant Fellowship Church had started to be very vocal on their beliefs and where they stood, and this is where things started to backfire on her. One day, Gwen got up and denied the Trinity. The Trinity is pretty much a foundational belief within many sects of Christianity, and so she got a lot of backfire for this and criticism, and many churches excommunicated themselves from Gwen and anything that Gwen was affiliated with, including the Way Down Workshop. They took their books, they mailed them back to Gwen's church. They were calling and emailing, and oh, she got a ration of shit for that remark for sure. So some of the other beliefs within the Remnant Fellowship were that they did not believe that you were saved by grace. They believed that you were saved by works and acts, not by the grace of Jesus dying on the cross. Gwen also believed that she had found the one true church, that Remnant Fellowship was the one and only true church. Nobody else had gotten it right in the history of the world, but she did. She also believed that the Gospels and the Bible had never been taught in their entirety, but she was able to teach them in their entirety. So this was the one true message and the one true church. If you were not a part of their church, sorry, you go into hell. Also, many members called Gwen a prophet. She even proclaimed to be a prophet. And if you are not feeling that Gwen's church is a cult at this point, then let me educate you on a cult. Anytime anybody is screaming that they are the one true church, they have found the one true message, and then proclaiming themselves to be a prophet, those are some of the biggest signs of a ministry, a church being a cult. Now, a lot of people, when they think of cult, they think of Jonestown. Now, yes, Jonestown was a cult, but it was definitely on the way more side of the extreme when it comes to cults. Cults can fall anywhere on the spectrum when it comes to identifying a cult, from extreme to just a little weird. They can fall anywhere on there, okay? A little bit of background for me. I was actually in a cult all the way through college. Yes, I know. What the fuck? I I had a lot of childhood trauma growing up. I also was very much the type of person that needed attention. I desired attention and friendship and community. We were very poor, and my parents were doing the best they could to raise us, but unfortunately they were not there for me emotionally like I needed, which made me seek that attention anywhere I possibly could. Church was something I got involved with at a very, very young age, and when I came into contact with this one specific ministry, they were very close. They had a bond with each other that was just so desirable. And man, when I say I jumped in, I jumped in. I gave my entire fucking life to this ministry. Kind of embarrassing, but I even signed a covenant. Now, we didn't have to cut our hands and like swap some blood, but man, if they would have told me to cut my hand and swap some fucking blood, I would have. That's how deep I was in this thing, guys. I'm not kidding. So we had to sign a covenant. This covenant consisted of, we had to read our Bible every day. We're not allowed to listen to any kind of secular music. We had, God, I can't even remember. It's been so long. We couldn't drink, smoke, things like that. We were not allowed to date. And I'm telling you, not dating in college, I missed so many fucking opportunities. Shit, it was, but I will say it did keep me from getting pregnant because I was a little promiscuous. Just saying. In high school I was. But then I joined the ministry and I was like, purity culture, yay! Religious trauma now, fuck! I was in this cult. It was very easy for me to get tied in. My entire life was tied into this thing. My job, my school, my family that I lived with at the time, it was all tied into it. And so when I was having questions and red flags and I wanted to leave, I was terrified because I was afraid of losing that kind of community. And they used the beliefs and my desire to please God against me to keep me a part of them. We're going to get into more on how that ties into Remnant Fellowship in a little bit, but let's keep moving on. In Remnant Fellowship, Gwen, as being the prophet, she was the sole person that could lead sermons. Nobody else led sermons. She did not share that responsibility with anyone. So remember, the church, Remnant Fellowship, and the Way Down Workshop are two separate entities at this time, but Gwen decided that that was not okay, and what she did was try to implement a policy that whoever worked at the Way Down Workshop had to also, as part of their employment, be a part of Remnant Fellowship and attend their Sunday services. This naturally pissed some people off, and this resulted in Gwen's first run-in with crime. 5 employees of the Way Down Workshop decided that this went against their freedom of religion and against their constitutional rights, and so they each individually sued Gwen. Then the 5 lawsuits were combined into one to be a class action lawsuit against Gwen and Remnant Fellowship. Gwen decided to settle with each of those members, and that policy was then changed. I wish I could say that that was their one and only time running in with crime and the law, but unfortunately it's not. While the Remnant Fellowship Church was growing, Gwen had found that a lot of people that were participating in the Way Down Workshop would lose weight, but then gain it back. And so she said that she took that to God and prayed and said, God, Lord, why are these people gaining their weight back? And she says that God told her that the reason that these people are gaining their weight back is because they are being disobedient to God. After this, the Remnant Fellowship Church and Gwen's beliefs in salvation and religion and God took a huge place within the Way Down Workshop. People started realizing that Gwen was tying people's salvation into the Way Down Workshop. So since your salvation was tied to, of course, your works, that it was a sin if you ate before your stomach physically grumbled. Because she believed that God gave your body the ability to tell you when to eat, and if you ate prior to that, your stomach grumbling, you were sinning. If you ate and didn't stop at just being satisfied and you ate more, you were sinning. If you lost weight, but then gained that weight back, not only were you sinning, but you lost your fucking salvation. Shit. To hell we go, because I gained 2 pounds. Like, what the fuck? Sometimes I'm like, who falls for this shit? And then I have to remind myself, Lacey, you were in a cult. And I'm like, fuck, I would have fallen for this. So when Gwen started tying people's salvation to the way they ate, what they ate, how they looked, how much weight they were losing, and all of that, it started to really take a toll on the members who were participating in the Way Down Workshop. Unfortunately, this created a lot of problems for women. It created a ton of eating disorders. It created a ton of women having problems with body dysmorphia, and even their view of food was very problematic for themselves. Many people who have come out of the Way Down workshop or left the church altogether have spoke out against Remnant Fellowship, and especially the problems with the Way Down workshop. Allegedly, it is believed that Gwen made all the members of the church participate in the Way Down workshop, pay for it, buy the books. It was not a question. It was not an option. It was mandatory. Now, Gwen puts a very big focus on what she calls eating thin.
Oh shit. Fuck me.
Sorry. There was a spider. I forgot I was recording. The little shit scared me. Okay, where the fuck was I? Holy crap. I honestly can't remember where I was. Gwen always talked about in her videos, in her workshops, everything that was tied to this diet. She talked constantly about teaching you how to eat thin.
You can quickly relearn how to eat like a thin eater.
The appearance of being thin meant that you were right with God because you were taking care of your body. Unfortunately, this diet did not promote exercise. Apparently, allegedly, exercise was something that was viewed as in the secular world and was not promoted. I do not understand how you can tie exercise to being secular. Like, wouldn't that be the same thing as like taking care of your body? See, the shit, some of it just doesn't make any damn sense to me. Personally, my opinion is that Gwen did know that this was causing many eating disorders within her members, because I saw her in a video, and I will put in a clip. She talks about how the Way Down workshop will help you be free of things like bulimia, addictions, drugs, and so on. But she does not say anything about anorexia, and anorexia was one of the big eating disorders that many of the members and people who went through the Way Down workshop ended up having trouble with.
Free from dieting or bulimia or exhausting exercise programs that have gotten you nowhere.
One member who left Remnant Fellowship said that when she was in the church and following the Way Down diet, she had asked her husband one day if she could have a Starbucks drink. Her husband turned around to her and his response was, "Do you want that Starbucks or do you want dinner?" Are you fucking kidding me? Do you know how much coffee, iced coffee, and Starbucks drinks I drink in a day? Shit! I'm going to hell just for that. Anyone else? There's a ton of you out there that are with me. I know it. Another one of the church's beliefs was that you always had to be positive. Negativity was not something that was allowed to be shown. You always had to focus on being positive. If you were negative, that you were just opening yourself up for bad things to happen to you. This was such a strong belief in the church that Gwen's daughter Elizabeth had a 5-month-old baby who died of SIDS. When the baby died in the middle of the night, they rushed into the hospital. They sent out a text asking for prayer. Everyone was praying for this poor baby, and unfortunately the baby passed and didn't make it. The next day at church, members said they arrived at church and it was like walking into a funeral. It was so just uncomfortable. People had no idea how to handle the emotion of Gwen's grandson passing, and it's very well known that they just didn't talk about it after that. It was not talked about during the sermon. It was just like, moving on. We have to stay positive. Another one of their beliefs is that if something bad happens to you or the church, it is because God is sending his judgment down because somebody is being disobedient to the Lord. Well, naturally, after this happens, the congregation is confused. They're asking questions like, why did this happen? Can you take that buzzer away from her? I'm like, I can hear it. It's the fourth time recording this, guys. So everyone is very confused on why this is happening. Why is God sending his judgment down? Who is being disobedient? Everyone's asking this question. Well, naturally it wasn't Gwen and her family because they are just too perfect. Do you know what they did? I'm gonna tell you what they did. They called in members of the church that they thought were not on the right track, and they started interviewing them and asking them if they were the ones that were responsible for Gwen's grandson dying. Guys, This is what religious trauma and spiritual abuse looks like. These poor families were pulled into a room and interviewed and made to feel like it was their fault for this little 5-month-old baby dying. If that is not an abuse of power, if that is not pushing some major religious trauma on some families, if that is not the most outrageous form of spiritual abuse, I don't know what is. So I'm going to give an extra trigger warning right now. We are about to cover child abuse and murder. So please, if this is too much for you, skip to the end of the video or come back for next week's episode. Joseph Smith was an 8-year-old boy, and him and his family attended Remnant Fellowship. Well, one day, while his parents were going into the worship service, Joseph was in childcare. The babysitter noticed that Joseph was visibly upset and sitting in the corner, very distraught. He went to Joseph's father and stopped him and asked, "Is there a game or a toy or something that I can do with your son to cheer him up?" The father turned to the babysitter and said, "Hit him." The babysitter was shocked and told the father, "I am very uncomfortable with putting my hands on your child. Is there just a game or something I can do to help him?" The father repeated himself by saying, "Hit him," and added, "Hit him hard." The girl repeated with, "Sir, I am uncomfortable putting my hands on your child." The father then went over to Joseph and took him by the hand into another room, and she said that everybody could hear him hitting his child very hard. Not too long after that, the paramedics were called to the Smith residence, where they found Joseph unresponsive and with a fever. When the paramedics arrived, the father said to them, "I'm not gonna lie, he's bruised." The paramedics made a statement saying that when they got there and saw Joseph in the state that he was in, that it was one of the worst cases of child abuse they had ever seen. They started immediately working on Joseph and rushed him to the hospital, where doctors and medical professionals also made the statement that it was again one of the worst cases of child abuse they had ever seen. While they were working on Joseph, they found that he had no brain activity, and unfortunately the very next day, Joseph passed. The medical examiner who did the autopsy on Joseph labeled his death as acute and chronic child abuse. Now, one of the beliefs within Remnant Fellowship is the belief that corporal punishment is a good form of discipline for children. One of the things that Remnant Fellowship members would pass around to each other was the opinion that you could use a glue stick as a tool to beat your child with. When most people think of glue sticks, they think of the small crafting glue sticks, but the glue sticks that are referenced when beating a child for corporal punishment are the between 10 and 12-inch glue sticks that have a diameter that's about the size of a nickel. These are very dense and very thick glue sticks that can be very painful if hit with. Many members have come out saying that that was something that was passed around by member after member after member, and many members of Remnant Fellowship used glue sticks as a form of punishment on their children when they were being disobedient. Remnant Fellowship also believed that children needed to be very obedient all the time. It didn't matter when or where, they needed to be obedient. Pretty much they were of the belief that children should be seen and not heard. One member came out saying that she was talked to after church one day because her children were being disobedient because they couldn't sit still through an entire 3-hour service. So basically, children were beat for being children. Yeah. Unfortunately, Joseph's case was very extreme. So naturally, with Joseph's death, it prompted an investigation. It didn't take investigators long to figure out that the reason that Joseph was beat so often was because of the parents' religious beliefs. The father even told investigators and police that the reason that Joseph was beat so often was because he was trying to beat the devil out of him. And they even said that they had to beat him that much because he was just disobedient and unruly. So when the investigators found this huge connection between the way that the Smiths disciplined their son and their religious beliefs, they started investigating the church. While they were investigating the church, to see if there was any connection between the church and the death of Joseph Smith, they found a tape. On this tape, you can hear Sonia, Joseph's mom, talking with Gwen. Sonia is praising the advice that she got from a fellow leader within Remnant. This advice was to take everything out of Joseph's room and lock him in there with only his Bible because he was so disobedient and unruly. This would surely correct the behavior. Sonia is heard saying that she locked Joseph in his room on a Friday after taking everything out of his room. The only thing she left him in that room with was a Bible and a bucket to pee and poop in. And she was caught on the tape praising the fact that that Joseph was a completely different child after coming out of that room. You can then hear Gwen praising Sonia for what she did and even saying, "Praise the Lord," because it worked, because Joseph was now a sweet little boy after being locked up for 4 days with only a Bible. Now, naturally, when this tape came out, Gwen denies everything. Yes, she's caught on this tape. Yes, you can hear her voice. How does Gwen get away with denying this? Persecution. She's being framed. That's not her on the tape. It was all made up. Give me a fucking break, Gwen. We know it was you. Shit. As they keep investigating the death of Joseph Smith, they found out that Joseph had been beaten with a multitude of objects, including belts, glue sticks, and even heated wire hangers. They found out that many times Joseph was locked into a closet and told to pray to a picture of Jesus on the wall, and once again he was only given a bucket to pee and poop in. Now, the night of Joseph's death, he was put into a basket because he was being disobedient. Well, as an 8-year-old boy would, he started peeking his head out of the basket. Unfortunately, his parents did not like this and decided they were going to put a lid on the basket. When they went to put the lid on, Joseph tried to peek his head out. They slammed the basket lid down onto Joseph's head and then used bungee cords to keep the lid shut. When they did this, they caused blunt force trauma to Joseph's head. When they finally decided hours later to let Joseph out of the box, the father opened it and found his son unresponsive. They also said that he was hot to the touch, and the father took him outside to lay him on the concrete to try to get him to come to. It did not work. Joseph's father took him back inside, and that is when he called 911. After the investigation, both parents of Joseph Smith were charged with his murder and sent to trial. At this point, the church was in an uproar. They couldn't believe that the parents of Joseph were being charged with such a heinous crime of murdering their son when it was completely unfounded. So what does the church do? The church decides to fund the defense of the Smiths. Yes, the church funded the entire case for the defense. They tried to come up with many claims explaining away Joseph's death, one of them saying that it was just a massive staph infection and he died. One of them saying it was a bacterial infection or something. I don't know. They came up with some ludicrous, stupid defenses. Thankfully, they didn't work, and both of Joseph's parents were charged with his murder. They were found guilty on 11 counts. They each got a felony murder count, a count of reckless conduct, a count of false imprisonment, 3 counts of aggravated assault, and 4 counts of cruelty to children. They were sentenced to life in prison plus 30 years, meaning they will never get out. Praise the Lord. Now, unfortunately, they couldn't find a direct connection tying the church to Joseph's death, so the church was not charged with anything. It was just Joseph's parents. The church has also come out after they were convicted, saying that they are innocent. They even went so far to buy the domain, The Smiths Are Innocent, where they tell the whole story and proclaim the innocence of the Smiths. That website is still active today, and they still promote that the Smiths were wrongfully convicted for the death of Joseph Smith. Now, in my opinion, the reason that the church did this is because they do not want to be tied to bad publicity. And come on, this is the death of an 8-year-old boy by the hands of his parents. This is the epitome of bad publicity. So naturally, yes, they came to the defense of the parents because it shone their church in a very negative light. The thing that just blows me away is like, this poor 8-year-old boy died. He died because of the beliefs that your church instilled into his parents about how children needed to be obedient and how parents needed to instill corporal punishment to make them obedient. Even though, side note, science has proven that corporal punishment does not work. Don't come at me. It's science. You're probably wondering if the church just crumbled after this. Unfortunately, no, it didn't. People still stayed. They came to the defense of the Smiths, and they defended Gwen. They defended the church. They defended their beliefs, like always. So now we're going to get into a little bit more of the juicy details. This is going to be a little bit more lighthearted. Whew, everyone take a breath. So one of the beliefs that Remnant Fellowship had was that you could not get divorced. It didn't matter if you had biblical reasoning to get divorced, i.e. an affair. No, Gwen said, no, you need to stick with it. Stick with your husband, stick with your wife, stay married. Nobody was allowed to get divorced. This left women in very abusive relationships. It was a fucking hot mess. Well, surprise, surprise, in 2018, Gwen decided, let's rewrite some doctrine. And she did just that. What doctrine did she change? Divorce doctrine. Of course she did. Of course she did. So in 2018, Gwen changed the doctrine and allowed for divorce. Why, you ask? Well, of course, Gwen met a man. Gwen had been married to a man named David Shamblin for years. They had had 2 kids. David was around from the very beginning when Gwen wrote the Way Down diet book, and he was even one of the leaders when Remnant Fellowship started. Unfortunately, David was not on board with a lot of the beliefs that Gwen held. He did not adhere to the Way Down diet, so he was a little bit on the bigger side. When Remnant Fellowship started, David was less and less in the spotlight until he just was not around very much at all. You never saw him on camera. Gwen rarely talked about him. He was just like a man in the background. But old Gwenny Poo couldn't get divorced. She had to stick by her man. Joe Laura comes in the picture. Who is Joe? Well, Joe is best known for his role as Tarzan in the show Tarzan in Manhattan. It was back in the day in the late 80s. It had a few seasons. So in layman's terms, Joe's really not well known. Now, Joe is a very interesting person. He had dealt with addiction to drugs and alcohol for years. He was the type of guy that would just jump from girl to girl because he loved him a sugar mama and somebody who could just, fund his lifestyle. He was like, I'm too cool for work. I just need a lady to pay my bills. So that's what he did. He just jumped from girl to girl to girl. So he meets Gwen, and naturally, Gwen's famous and has a fuck ton of money. So he's like, bing, bing, opportunity. And he fucking snagged it. Which, in all honesty, you can't blame him. Like, come on. He got himself a sugar mommy. Good job. Can't blame you. Joe was a handyman at the time in Tennessee, and he did some work at the church, and that is where he met Gwen. I do not know the specifics of how they met, but apparently they met. Bing, bang, boom, fell in love. Then, that is when Gwen decided to change the doctrine within the church and allowed for divorce. She divorced her husband in 2018 and got engaged and married to Joe in the same fucking year. What? Girl didn't even wait for the ink to dry. She was like, Chuck, you my man. Now the crazy thing is, after they got married, Joe was very much thrown into the spotlight of leadership within the church. His leadership role was right in line with Gwen. Gwen soaked it up because now she had a man that was standing by her side, that was supporting her, that was there for her. Joe loved him some money, so what did Gwen do? She started funding a bunch of lavish vacations. She wasn't as present at the church. Joe got a bunch of new fancy clothes. He got some planes. Joe had definitely started living the high life. Now, when Gwen changed the doctrine and allowed for divorce and married Joe, it definitely made some people question. They were like, red flag. But unfortunately, it wasn't enough of a red flag for their church to crumble. People left, but not enough to really make Gwen or the church care. So we're gonna fast forward a little bit to 2021. In early to mid-May, allegedly, I have to say allegedly, the church had a secret meeting. How I found out about the secret meeting was from another YouTuber called Without a Crystal Ball. She has a video over this, and I will link it below so you can check it out in its entirety. She has a source from the church that told her all about this meeting. But once again, we do not have facts about this meeting, so remember, this meeting is allegedly. So they had this secret meeting in early to mid-May of 2021. No cameras were allowed, no phones were allowed, nothing was being recorded. Apparently at this meeting, Gwen gets up on stage and she starts to tell her congregation that 1, racism does not exist. If you see somebody that is superior to you and you feel like they're in a higher position than you, that it's not their fault. They didn't make you feel that way. You made yourself feel that way. So you just need to get over it. You're being a big baby. Gwen also told them where they can get their news sources from. I am assuming, this is my opinion, it was Fox News is what they promoted. They also said that there were only certain people that they could follow and trust. One of those people was Candace Owens. None of us are shocked. They also promoted MAGA rallies. They promoted the conspiracy that the vote was stolen. They even told their congregation that they needed to become constitutionalists and prepare to defend the government at all costs. We are not sure exactly what that means, but that's what they were told, allegedly. Basically, Gwen and the leaders were very much against any social movement, whether that was LGBTQIA, BLM, basically anything that was tied into what they called the liberal agenda. Thankfully, allegedly, there was some uproar at the end of this meeting. Members got very upset that Gwen was saying racism didn't exist. They spoke against Gwen, and some of them allegedly even got up and left this meeting. Well, unfortunately, on May 29th, 2021, Gwen, Joe, and 5 other leaders of Remnant Fellowship boarded a private plane where Joe was flying, and they were on their way to a MAGA rally. After they took off, they were heading into some very bad weather. They headed into some clouds, and Joe took a sharp right turn twice. Unfortunately, this made Joe have what's called spatial disorientation. Basically, what that means is a pilot just loses where he's at in air. When he took these sharp right turns and developed spatial disorientation, he ended up exceeding the max knots allowed for this plane. Every plane has a max knots that it can fly. If it exceeds that max knots, then the plane can actually start falling apart in midair because it's not built for that speed. Unfortunately, they exceeded that max knots. The plane went down and crashed into Percy Priest Lake in Tennessee. Now, they do believe that the plane did fall apart in air because the debris field for this plane crash was over a half a mile. And usually when a plane just crashes and doesn't fall apart in air, it's a more condensed debris field. So since this one was over a half a mile, they do assume that the plane did start falling apart in midair. Unfortunately, there were no survivors, but they were able to recover all of the bodies. Now, when they started to investigate this flight, they found out that Joe, even though he was a licensed pilot, he was not licensed at the time of this flight. All pilots are required to maintain a medical clearance, and it has to be updated every 2 years. When they did the investigation, they found out that Joe's medical clearance hadn't been updated since 2017, so technically he was not licensed to fly this plane. Also, from what I'm understanding, Joe had only been licensed to fly this specific type of plane for about a year, and most pilots will tell you that that's not enough time to become very proficient at flying bigger types of planes, and that you really need to have a co-pilot with you to help if something was to go wrong. Unfortunately, Joe did not have a co-pilot with him, and some have criticized that that was a big mistake for Joe. So I'm sure you're wondering, what's happened to the church now? Its leader has died. Well, Gwen's daughter Elizabeth has taken over as leadership of the church. It is still going strong as of this moment. Now, Gwen's passing is still pretty fresh. She died May 29th of 2021. So I think the church is still in this kind of flux period to figure out what is going to happen. Because Elizabeth was raised by Gwen, she is going to have a lot of similar, if not the exact same beliefs and opinions, because Gwen was her mom. So in my opinion, that doesn't give me hope or faith that the church is actually going to change. But luckily, the church is getting a lot of attention right now. The way I found out about this church and Gwen was through the documentary series that HBO released called The Way Down, W-A-Y. And it has 3 parts that has released so far. It's going to be releasing more, so I highly recommend that you check that out on HBO and keep up to date with it as they release more episodes. I'm on pins and needles. I cannot wait to figure out what all else they have uncovered. Now, there are more in these documentary series and more about Remnant Fellowship that I just could not add into this video without making it 17 hours. So I highly recommend you go watch that documentary series. I'm going to link some of my sources below. Also, that video about the secret meeting, alleged secret meeting by Without a Crystal Ball. So go ahead and go check out Katie's video if you want to check out that video in its entirety. I do want to leave you with 2 things. My little opinion, maybe this is my pettiness coming out. We'll see. So I found out there's a person I follow on TikTok and their username is called Deconversion Therapy. They actually live in Brentwood, Tennessee. So after the documentary came out, they watched it and they thought, I'm just going to drive by and see what this is all about. Well, naturally, they weren't able to get in because Remnant Fellowship was prepared. They had a tent outside and they were like turning people away. The funny thing is though, where Remnant Fellowship is located, it's just a tiny little road, 2-way road. It's tiny. It's just kind of, it's not very populated, okay? It's not a major highway, you know? Not a lot of people are going to be driving down this way, right? But because HBO is like the level of petty that I just love, not even a mile away from the church was this billboard. And I'm not talking like those super high billboards. This was like one of those smaller, you know, just barely off the ground kind of billboards. Like not even taller than the trees. What does HBO do? They rented that billboard. And what did they advertise? You guessed it, they advertised the Way Down documentary series. So that means whenever HBO decided to rent this billboard and put up this ad, people that were going to and from the church saw this every single time. I love that. HBO, A+. That was just, oh my gosh. I want to hug whoever came up with that idea and whoever put the stamp of approval on it, because I am there for that level of petty. I am there for it, okay? Not to speak ill of the dead. You know, I'm sorry she died. That is very traumatic for her family, and I know that loss is a very big thing, but unfortunately, Gwen caused a lot of pain, a lot of trauma for many members. She caused a lot of harm, so that is where the criticism is coming in. And I just want to point out that her hypocrisy was her downfall. No pun intended. Still funny. But if she would have never changed the doctrine of divorce, if she would have never gone back on her word and become a hypocrite, or made her hypocrisy very well known, she would have never married Joe. She would have never been on that flight with Joe as the pilot, and it would have never crashed. So, literally, her hypocrisy was her downfall. I would love to know what you think about this case, about Gwen, about the church. If you have any personal experience with Gwen or the Remnant Fellowship Church, or even the Way Down Workshop, please leave some comments below. If you have any suggestions over cases, churches, congregations, leaders that you would like me to cover in the future, I would also love to hear that. And so comment below your suggestions. I just want to say thank you for watching episode 1 of Church Crime Time Tuesdays. This was so fun, and I cannot wait to do more. So if you like this kind of content, you're going to want to make sure and hit that subscribe button and ring that bell so that way you do not miss any other uploads. Today was fun. I love you all. Remember, stay safe out there, do some self-care activities, and have a wonderful week. See you guys next Tuesday. Bye!